One. Hi all. Thank you for attending my session on how to achieve perfection without being perfect. A session that will focus predominantly on the what, why, and how of supporting faculty in learning from their mistakes. I'm Zach Cohen, the middle school director at St. Francis here in Louisville, Kentucky, a non-denominational, progressive independent school. I'm also a consultant and blogger for the Core Collaborative, and if you'd like to connect with me or follow me, I can be reached at my Twitter handle. This session, as all sessions during this conference, is designed to revolve around wellness and well-being, something that perhaps isn't always prioritized the way it should be in schools, but equally is something that we have found to be trending in the right direction for years now. This trend has been accelerated and accentuated by the onset of the pandemic as schools and school leaders have sought an expanded array of initiatives and one-offs to boost morale. And this is where I want to start today, with what has been done over the course of the past 10 months to boost faculty morale. In a recent NAIS bulletin, this essential practice of supporting faculty and staff was highlighted. This very act of conducting a survey of practices that can oftentimes be overlooked speaks to the prominence of this very issue at this very moment. Back in October, when I reviewed these results, I approached it as a checklist of sorts, seeing what I had done and what was still left for me to do. In all, after running down the list, I felt pretty good about what I had done or what was already in the pipeline. I was starting each of my days by expressing my gratitude to the faculty through handwritten letters that I placed on their desks. We lightened our meeting load by canceling faculty meetings that we deemed even remotely frivolous. We put in place guidelines for emailing, which asked that nobody send emails to our faculty before 8:30 a.m. or after 5:30 p.m., thus permitting our faculty to set limits, disconnect, and recharge with school far from their minds. We even extended our Thanksgiving break by a couple of days. Now, I don't imagine that what I'm sharing here rings unfamiliar, as my understanding is that schools around the country are finding their own ways to do just this. I even know of one school that paid their faculty a $1,000 bonus in recognition of their hard work. Interestingly, though, what we've learned is that whether it's $1,000, additional vacation days, or expressions of gratitude, the corresponding morale boost is ephemeral at best. There might be a momentary bump, even a significant increase, but that soon enough, faculty morale reverts back to pre-action, pre-initiative levels. In fact, there's almost an inverse correlation between faculty morale and the number of actions that have been taken to boost morale. If a quarter of the faculty is currently experiencing their highest point of stress at the same time that school heads reported the myriad actions they have taken to ameliorate their faculty's stress, it seemed that gratitude, gifts, events, and the like are serving merely as temporary stopgaps, right? Band-aids to a more enduring dip in well-being. So the big question facing us right now is what can we do to support our faculty in a way that is both enduring and empowering? In today's presentation, I'm going to discuss one way to go about answering this question by introducing you to the theory of mistake literacy, a mindset and skill set designed to support faculty in recognizing, reacting to, and repairing their mistakes. As participants, you will leave this presentation knowing 1, why learning from mistakes matters and why it matters now. 2, how learning from mistakes may support faculty well-being. 3, what the research says about how to optimize learning from mistakes. And 4, how to apply this research to their individual school contexts. There are also going to be a few different ways that you can engage in this presentation. The first is that you can simply add quick comments or clarifying questions using the chat feature. The second is that every time you see a Padlet icon in the bottom left-hand corner, there are 6 of these in all, you can click on the Padlet link that I've added into the chat to anonymously respond to a corresponding question. Padlet icon number 1, as we can see here, corresponds to question number 1, for example. Third and finally, if you're active on Twitter, you can post your learning using the hashtag #MistakeLiteracy. As you can see, there's a Padlet icon on this slide, so if you'd like to, you can go to the Padlet to reply to the first question. So let's start by talking about why learning from our mistakes matters now more than ever before. And really, there are 2 general reasons. The first revolves around vulnerability, and the second revolves around opportunity. You see, these days, I find myself cribbing Brene Brown's wisdom quite frequently when speaking to members of my faculty. Give yourself grace, I remind them, or give me a C+ effort rather than an A. The thing is, no matter how many times I repeat these pithy aphorisms, the faculty won't seem to compromise the high standards they set for themselves. In normal circumstances, teachers aren't comfortable given a C+ effort. And now, as we see inequities exacerbated and achievement dipping, our faculty is less willing than ever to give anything less than an A effort. The trouble here is that the novel and challenging circumstances of teaching during a pandemic have widened the distance between effort and outcome. The same effort will no longer produce the same results. By trying to straddle this growing divide, the faculty is feeling heightened levels of fatigue, stress, and anxiety, which in turn has led to an unavoidable increase in the number of mistakes that are being made. I mean, how could these things not be correlated? Consider how the goalposts have shifted since we all went back to remote in March. We mastered Google Classroom only to find our school move into a new LMS. We learned best practices for remote instruction only to find them obsolete when we moved to a hybrid instruction model. We optimized learning at 6 feet apart only to find that 2 mid-year transfers would be joining our class starting next Monday. How can we achieve perfection when the target keeps changing? The A effort that we are giving is resulting in C+ outcomes, at least temporarily. And through all of these shifts, the faculty is on display in a way that they have never been before. Whether it's lessons being recorded and posted, or synchronous sessions for our distant learners, we really no longer know who is seeing our lessons. The inevitable minor mistakes that we make as we gain mastery over new technology and new pedagogy is magnified by the specter of parents or administrators being privy to our every imperfection. Given the ubiquity and vulnerability of mistake making right now, the issue is not whether mistakes will be made or whether they can be eradicated, an approach that will only result in higher levels of stress and in turn more mistakes, an unvirtuous cycle, if you will, but whether mistakes can serve as an instrument to enable further learning, something that is far from a given. Consider that the baseball player who strikes out 200 times in a season is not destined to lead the league in home runs the next season. That player may have 200 opportunities to learn from their mistakes, but not all mistakes are instructive. That player may never learn to lay off the 2-2 slider. In high-error professions like baseball or teaching, the issue really isn't whether mistakes will occur, but whether we can create the conditions wherein learning will. Now, we'll circle back to that in just a minute, right? How to set these conditions. Before that, though, I want to touch on the second reason why learning from mistakes matters, and that's opportunity. For years, education reformers have asked what it will take to catalyze a reimagining of the industrial model of schooling, the division of space and time, the splintering of knowledge into subjects, and the belief that learning must take place in a school building. It would seem that the answer lies in a global pandemic. Suddenly, we have all found that this profession we've known so intimately for decades has begun to evolve at a rapid pace. The realities of distance and hybrid learning have softened the ground for change. This experience has compelled some very practical updates to our teaching toolkit, such as newfound adeptness with technology and a greater investment in the school-home partnership. It has also compelled us to take new risks, both within and outside of our organizations. At St. Francis, for instance, these changes have included a modified distance learning schedule, extended advisory time, a weekly wellness hour, an expanded DEI curriculum, partnerships with local universities, cross-divisional course offerings, and collaboration with out-of-state STEM nonprofits. The question now is whether these changes will last beyond the pandemic. Now, it would seem to me that there are two possible outcomes here. First, we revert back to the way that things were before the pandemic, or second, we leverage this abnormal situation to allow for a new normal to emerge. Now, if the second choice existed in a silo, it'd be a no-brainer. We know how important continued experimentation, reflection, and iteration is to move education forward. Unfortunately, this choice has significant and direct implications for teachers. So how do we preserve the sanity and strength of our teachers while also being sure that we don't throw away our shot at real-time action research and reform? The answer isn't terribly complicated. If we accept that there is no panacea when it comes to teaching, no such thing as the perfect school or the perfect pedagogy, there is no perfect path and no perfect outcome when it comes to the work that we do. Rather, there is experimentation, reflection, and iteration in the pursuit of improvement. A school culture should revolve around improving, not proving. When we think of teaching and learning these days, we should think of it as a heuristic tool of sorts, an approach to problem solving, learning, and discovery that is not guaranteed or even meant to be optimal, but is rather meant to be a journey towards figuring out what works best for our times, our context, our students, and ourselves. With such a mindset, we can move more easily to create the conditions to encourage and celebrate risk-taking, knowing that the resulting mistakes can help to blaze a path for future successes. Of course, the value of mistakes in this context is predicated on those who make them being versed in how to actually learn from them. So while we as school leaders may be the purveyors of change initiatives, our faculty are the practitioners. So we have to find ways to enable our faculty to learn from the mistakes that they are bound to make when trying something new. Again, something that is not promised, or certainly is not a promised byproduct of mistake making. In 2009, then President Obama spoke to a group of students at Wakefield High School in Arlington, Virginia. As someone who had readily and unabashedly admitted to the mistakes of his youth and how these missteps informed the adult he had become, he humbly but stridently impressed upon his audience the importance of learning from one's mistakes. "You can't let your failures define you," he said. "You have to let them teach you." Anyone listening to this speech would invariably have nodded along to President Obama's rhetoric. This is because learning from one's mistakes is an idea that is far from novel. It is both ancient and perennial. Learning from mistakes transcends time, culture, and place. Consider the fact that there is no barrier for entry. People living in any period at any socioeconomic level have all had equal access to mistakes, and yet, in spite of its universality, it is also one of the most untapped and underutilized learning resources at people's disposal. There remains a yet-to-be-reconciled chasm between what is axiomatic to people's experiences, mistakes are the best teacher, with the sort of opaque alchemy of how mistakes translate into learning. Because there's a dearth of research into this process, the process itself remains murky, and thus people's obstinance around the benefits of mistakes persists. For example, Yang, Potts, and Shanks in 2017 found that when study participants' attention was drawn to the benefits of error generation or information retrieval from memory, study participants continued to prioritize less effective study strategies that did not involve mistake making. This adverse response to mistake making would seem to suggest that people would prefer not to dip their toes into the murky waters of errorful learning, even if errorful learning actually improves learning outcomes. This aversion to engage with mistakes can for some people be amplified to such a point that it warrants its very own diagnosis in the medical nomenclature, aticophobia. So, while President Obama is right to remind us to learn from our failures, this rightness requires more than rhetoric. It requires a roadmap. Existing research tells us how to minimize mistakes and provides us with lessons about how we can go wrong and how to avoid such an outcome. But what the research has not done is make learning something sought after from the mistake-making process, rather than being something denied. This is where mistake literacy comes in. Mistake literacy is about becoming fluent in how to learn from our mistakes. Specifically, it's a mindset comprised of a suite of dispositions and non-cognitive skills that work in tandem to optimize learning by building students' capacity and capability to recognize, react to, and repair their mistakes. Now, mistakes come in all shapes and sizes, so it's important for us to make sure that we're on the same page about which types of mistakes we're talking about here. While mistakes might be evidence of effort, mistake literacy is about engaging with and correcting mistakes so that effort translates to learning. For learning to occur, mistakes cannot be haphazard or flippant, but must be legitimate attempts at a new task or an investment in the development of a new skill. These mistakes occur because learners have pushed themselves to the edge of their knowledge or experience. Such mistakes, which are the unavoidable byproduct of learning, expose gaps and raise questions and open the possibility for reflection and analysis. Through this form of mistake-making, learners develop a theory of what's correct, apply it, and revisit it as necessary. Thus, mistake literacy implies more than just awareness, it implies action on behalf of the learner. In this way, mistake literacy is about making the most of what is natural and unavoidable to the learning process, the process itself. Mistake literacy consists of four components: growth mindset, self-repair, the learner empowerment cycle, and self-efficacy. Let's start by taking a look at the growth mindset. A person with a growth mindset believes intelligence, skills, and abilities are not static, but are dynamic entities that can be strengthened through experience. Those possessing a growth mindset are more likely to view challenges and failures as opportunity to improve their learning and skills. In this way, faculty members who have a growth mindset are more likely to hold a positive perception of mistakes and mistake making. Right? These faculty members perceive failure as a cue to increase effort, self-monitoring, and self-instruction, rather than as a deterrent. Dweck found that the skills and competencies that underline a growth mindset, those of resilience, diligence, and self-management, produce learners who embrace challenges, persist in the face of setbacks, and learn from criticism. While those with a fixed mindset gave up quickly and blamed challenges on a lack of intelligence, the research has found that people with more of a growth mindset kept working in spite of the difficulty, recognizing that setbacks were inevitable on the road to mastery and that they could even be guideposts for the journey. These people perceived failure as a cue to increase effort, self-monitoring, and self-instruction. Simple as it sounds, a belief in the transformative power of mindset is one of the keys to maximizing one's ability to learn from their mistakes. The growth mindset is foundational to growing one's mistake literacy, but the research has found that to maximize its impact, people need to be put in positions to make their mindsets actionable. So how can this mindset be brought to life? When a mistake is made, one's first instinct should be to act on it. There's no sense in pretending the mistake did not occur. But acting on a mistake is not in and of itself going to guarantee learning. Action that is flippant or self-flagellated is no more effective than burying one's head in the sand. The action that one takes following a mistake needs to be purposeful and deliberate. To maximize learning from mistakes, people need to know where they are going, when they are going, what it will look like when they get there, and where they will go next. The self-repair process is intended to do just that. Self-repair consists of self-assessment and goal setting. Self-assessment involves the individual reflecting on mistakes to facilitate consideration of what to repair. Goal setting builds on this by challenging the individual to identify pathways and resources so that they know how to repair it. The first step in the self-repair process is that of self-assessment. Self-assessment is, in its essence, an evaluation. It asks the individual to take stock of their perception of strengths and deficits related to the learning, with the goal being to build an awareness of what they are ready for next. Reflecting on correct and incorrect examples has been shown to be effective for learning across domains, with the effects being strongest when individuals have previously generated erroneous solutions themselves. This relationship stems from the fact that reflection helps individuals to gain a new perspective, thus clarifying what they did incorrectly and facilitating contemplation of strategies that can help to solve the problem. In other words, the influence of self-assessment on learning increases when it is rooted in mistake-making because this shift in perspective preempts a like shift in actions. Goal setting is the pivot point between reflection and action, the benefits of which are well documented. From the existing research, we learn that one quality of goal-oriented individuals that seems to stand out is their willingness to take risks and learn from their mistakes. They appear confident that nothing bad will happen to them when they fail. In all, the self-repair process operationalizes the growth mindset. These individuals already understand one approach that does not work, that being what led to the mistake in the first place, so they now have the chance to consider what that mistake teaches them and what other options are available. In this way, the self-repair process brings individuals to the edges of their knowledge, which, as Jim Rickabow speaks of, is where learning occurs. For that learning to occur, though, a choice needs to be made. The next step is for the individual to be empowered to act on that choice. The learning empowerment cycle consists of choice, motivation, and engagement, three dispositions that work recursively to develop self-directed individuals who are increasingly likely to learn from their mistakes. When individuals have choice, they develop feelings of autonomy. When an individual feels autonomous, they are more motivated, and when motivation is acted upon, it becomes engagement. Mistake-literate individuals must be engaged, but the goal of mistake literacy is not to engage them. Rather, the goal is to create the conditions where an engagement becomes possible. When learning is connected to choice, the learning becomes more purposeful and relevant. And according to the research, when choice is integrated into learning, it can increase levels of motivation, which can in turn increase levels of engagement. Choice is omnipresent, residing in every situation regardless of one's awareness of it. For many people, however, choice is oftentimes hidden. Faculty, for example, often do not see posting a weekly assignment to Google Classroom, for instance, as a choice. The reality, though, is that the mere act of abiding by or failing to abide by that expectation is, in and of itself, a choice. Whether they realize it or not, choice is always operating in the background at the subconscious level. The purpose of the learner empowerment cycle is to bring choice to the conscious level. In doing so, teachers, faculty members, can become aware of the broad array of choices at their disposal, which allows them to acknowledge the power and control they actually have over their learning. By bringing choice to the forefront of their consciousness, it increases feelings of autonomy. Motivation is the presence of an emotional or psychological attraction to a task. Within the context of education, motivation refers to a willingness, need, desire, or compulsion to participate in and be successful in the learning process. Of course, there are multiple forms of motivation, some of which are better suited to empowering individuals. According to the research, there are 3 types of motivation: lacking, extrinsic, and intrinsic. To empower learners, it is imperative that teachers are put in positions to be intrinsically motivated. Right? These learners who are intrinsically motivated do not wait for someone else to motivate them because they have access to skills, tools, and stimuli to help themselves go in without depending on someone else to tweak their pursuit or manipulate their circumstances. Engagement then occurs when individuals make an emotional or psychological investment in their learning. The engaged individual sees learning as its own reward rather than feeling a need to seek out external validation. In this way, someone engaged in learning does not look to traditional measures of success to validate their learning, but instead focus on the process. Even when faced with challenges, an engaged individual continues to study and find a personal value and meaning in their learning. When it comes to developing mistake-literate learners, choice, motivation, and engagement do not constitute warm and fuzzy extra components of effort to improve learning. In fact, they are primary drivers in developing individuals who possess the feelings of competence and confidence to learn from their mistakes. The cumulative impact of the learner empowerment cycle equips individuals to become increasingly autonomous in their learning. The learner empowerment cycle, however, is not the endpoint of growing mistake-literate individuals, but a vehicle to ready those individuals to become increasingly self-efficacious. Self-efficacy can be thought of as a catch-all term for an individual's confidence in exerting control over their learning and persistent to overcome challenges. Self-efficacy leads to individuals to persist in the face of challenges and continually try different strategies to overcome obstacles. The presence of self-efficacy is important for individuals to stretch and grow and to move beyond present levels of skills and knowledge. According to Gunn 2019, those with high levels of self-efficacy work harder, persist longer, and have fewer adverse emotional reactions when encountering difficulties. Self-efficacy instills the daring and self-certainty to ignore barriers and learn from their errors. High-efficacy individuals possess the competence and confidence to see mistake-making as an opportunity as opposed to an obstacle. Of course, high-efficacy individuals haven't reached a proverbial mountaintop and now have the key to learn from all of their mistakes from this point forward. Mistake literacy is not a one-off, but a process meant to be followed every time an error occurs, as this constant application, a recursive cycle that grows stronger with each pass-through. When an individual with high self-efficacy finds success, having learned from a mistake, it in turn strengthens their growth mindset, right? With effort, I can learn from my mistakes, and thus strengthens the individual's commitment to mistake literacy. In this way, self-efficacy is not the final step of mistake literacy, but the linchpin that links one mistake to the next. So, why do we need a system to enable people to learn from their mistakes? Well, it is not only because learning from mistakes is rare, it's also because there are some people who are simply genetically more or less predisposed towards it. A team of neuroscience from Germany reported in 2007 that people with a particular gene variation have greater difficulty learning from negative reinforcement than those without the gene variation. That means that those with the gene variation are slow to learn from bad experiences and mistakes. A system such as mistake literacy is intended to level the playing field. While it might come naturally to some people, it doesn't come naturally to all. Think about a basketball player who is tall and strong and coordinated. Such genetic gifts do not guarantee any sort of outcome. They still require world-class fitness, training, and nutrition. Just as someone who isn't born with these gifts, but has the same goal, will need to similarly engage in such fitness, training, and nutrition, even if it doesn't come as naturally and maybe involves a steeper learning curve. The key here is not that the learning curve is steeper, so much as the fact that genetics is not destiny, whether we're talking about basketball or learning from our mistakes. The key question is how much we believe we can do with what we were born with. If we believe our smarts or skills are pretty much set in concrete, we are going to avoid and dread mistakes. If we believe that with more effort, we can keep getting better and better, then we can view mistakes less harshly and as part of the overall learning process of growing and learning. Although some people seem disposed to deal more effectively with mistakes, it is not a single trait that you either possess or you don't. Rather, it's a set of skills that can be improved and developed. Understanding the complex, dynamic, and multifaceted nature of learning from mistakes is important because it enhances feelings of controllability and empowers individuals to take responsibility for their mistakes and their learning alike. Furthermore, it reveals that there is no magic pill or recipe. Each individual will have their own variations to this learning process, with different mistakes, different outcomes, and different circumstances dictating the soundboard of how this will all be used. And truly, this is how mistake literacy should be thought of, as a soundboard. When an individual possesses a comprehensive knowledge of the theory as a whole, that individual can then turn the dials of the board to apply coping responses and strategies to best match the demands of a situation, which is arguably more predictive of learning than being told precisely how to deploy this construct. Picture 3 scenarios. In the first, you have sent a Google form in which you forgot to collect respondents' email addresses. In the second, you send an email to a parent in which you forget one letter in the word shirt. In the third, you have a heated disagreement with a departmental colleague while moderating grades. For each of these 3 scenarios, self-repair, for example, the process of self-assessment and goal setting, is critical. However, the way you opt to engage in this process will vary depending on a range of factors, each of which requires you to turn the dial of the soundboard in a way that optimizes your learning from this mistake. Now, what we've learned thus far in this presentation is that an extra day of vacation isn't going to boost faculty morale in any sort of enduring way. Think of such initiatives as soul candy rather than soul food. Rather, we want to be pragmatic in the sort of support we are offering. The truth is, we don't know when we are going to be on the other side of the pandemic, and adding days off or throwing money at our faculty isn't sustainable. Instead, we should be seeking strategies that address the core of our faculty's professional distress. Effort and outcome are 2 sides of an ever-growing divide that is resulting in more mistakes being made at a time when these mistakes have never been more public. Mistakes, especially when seen by a parent or boss, have a nasty tendency to leave us feeling embarrassed, even humiliated. In part, this is the result of their feeling so final. When we know how to learn from our mistakes, however, we are permitted to change our perspective, perceiving mistakes as nothing more than the first step on a much longer learning journey. Now, this shift is one that takes time. There are several things that I've done with my faculty to help them become increasingly mistake literate, but there is no perfect solution. So first, I think that what's important to recognize is that this is an unending process. We're talking about reconditioning adults who, as products of the American education system, have decades of prior negative associations with mistake making. So given the recursive nature of this work, it has to start by introducing the construct. From there, it comes down to reinforcing this belief until the faculty begins to see that this is actually what you believe. Mistakes, at least those in pursuit of learning, are to be encouraged and celebrated since they are an indication of our challenging the existing grammar of school, one that was far from perfect even before the pandemic. For each faculty member, this process of kind of convincing them of your beliefs is going to take a little bit of time, and it's going to look a little bit different. For one of my teachers, it took the form of bi-weekly phone calls during which we set goals for her upcoming department meetings, chunking her risk-taking into tangible and manageable learning objectives. For others, It is greeting their stories of cataclysmic failure with breakout rooms or some other new technology with gentle humor and commiseration, praising their willingness to try something new. It has also been about reminding the faculty that as we enter into our second and third stints with remote and hybrid learning, that we should see each of these periods as the next iteration. I ask the faculty to try, tinker, experiment, and improve, not because we're necessarily going to find that perfect balance, but because it signifies a commitment to and pursuit of creating the best possible learning environment for our students. So as based on our learning, how might you use mistake literacy to support your faculty in a way that is both enduring and empowering? And as you enter your responses to that question onto the Padlet, I'll open up to a Q&A. So in a second, I'm going to end this recording. And when I do end this recording, let's turn this presentation into an informal, sort of semi-structured Q&A of sorts, right? There's no need to use the chat feature unless that's your preference. Instead, please just unmute and feel free to ask your questions. All right. Looking forward to engaging you all in conversations about and around how we can use mistake literacy to quell the concerns of our faculty and increase feelings of well-being. Thanks, guys.